13 owners control 15% of Montana's private land. That figure comes from a peer-reviewed study published in December 2025, and it is not a political talking point. It is what the deed records show. To put that in context, a timber company called Weyerhaeuser sits at the top of that list as Montana's largest private landowner, and the Wilks brothers, two hydraulic fracturing billionaires from Texas, rank among the largest individual owners. A real estate entity called DF Development, which most Montanans have never heard of, is part of how they got there. Hold that number and apply it to a state covering 94 million acres. Then ask yourself how 13 entities came to hold that much of it without most Montanans realizing it was happening, and where exactly the paper trail leads. In 2011, two brothers from Texas named Dan and Ferris Wilks sold their stake in a hydraulic fracturing company called FracTech for approximately $3.5 billion. They had built the company up from a masonry business, which is itself a remarkable origin story, and the sale converted them into billionaires within a single transaction. Within months, Montana land started moving into their portfolio. The first major acquisition came in January 2011, the N-Bar Ranch, 62,000 acres in central Montana, purchased from software billionaire Tom Siebel for $45 million. The Billings Gazette covered it at the time, and on the surface it read like a wealthy buyer adding a trophy property. A clean, simple story. Except it wasn't. Over the following 2 years, the brothers quietly assembled more than 177,000 acres across Fergus, Musselshell, and Golden Valley counties, according to Billings Gazette reporting from 2012. Their total Montana holdings grew beyond 276,000 acres across 7 counties. By 2019, the land surrounding the original N-Bar had expanded to approximately 200,000 contiguous acres, per further Billings Gazette reporting, and that figure may be larger today. For scale, Stan Kroenke, another billionaire landowner operating in the American West, controls roughly 1.38 million acres across multiple states through properties like the Broken O Ranch. And John Malone, frequently cited as the largest private landowner in the United States, holds over 2 million acres nationally. Montana's concentration problem is not unique, but it is acute. Here is the mechanism that made this possible, and the reason so few people caught it while it unfolded. None of the purchases appeared under the names Dan Wilks or Ferris Wilks. They appeared under a real estate entity called DF Development, and by 2019, that entity held approximately 75,000 acres across 306 separate parcels in Valley County alone, according to county records. 306 individual entries in the public record, each one a transaction, none of them signaling the full picture on its own. This is not illegal. It isn't even unusual for large-scale land acquisition. But it carries real consequences because the county assessor's system, which functions as the primary public tool for tracking ownership, is built to record parcels rather than portfolios. Search for DF Development and you can find it. If you're a local rancher or a county commissioner watching general ownership trends, though, you probably aren't searching for DF Development. You're watching land change hands one parcel at a time, and the pattern only becomes visible in aggregate, which takes time and resources that most counties simply don't have. The December 2025 study in environmental management, led by Alexander Metcalf at the University of Montana, identified a related structural gap. Metcalf's team worked from Montana cadastral database records, the statewide parcel system that aggregates county assessor data, and that source matters because it is what makes portfolio-level analysis possible at all. Details about trust owners aren't typically recorded in Montana's land records at all, and a limited liability company can hold a Montana tax mailing address regardless of where its actual owner lives. Metcalfe's team documented a 4 percentage point increase in property tax bills sent to out-of-state addresses between 2004 and 2023, pulling from Montana Department of Revenue data, and that figure almost certainly undercounts the real shift because it only captures what mailing addresses reveal. Set the headline number aside for a moment and look at what the granular assessor data actually shows. Between 2000 and 2021, approximately 1 million acres of Montana land converted to residential use, according to Headwater's analysis of Montana Department of Revenue property assessment records. That is an area roughly the size of Glacier National Park, reclassified from agricultural and open land status to housing. Montana has since overtaken California as America's least affordable housing market relative to income, according to Visual Capitalist reporting from June 2026, and these pressures compound each other. Large-scale consolidation at the top of the market doesn't exist in isolation from what happens at the bottom. The public access dimension of this is worth naming precisely. Montana operates a block management program, a voluntary state system through which landowners are compensated for opening private land to hunters and other outdoor users. It covers millions of acres in a given year, but it is voluntary, and it has no mechanism that requires participation when land changes hands. When a parcel moves from a fifth-generation ranch family into a corporate entity, the block management agreement does not automatically transfer. The access just closes. In September 2025, a different kind of buyer entered the conversation. American Prairie, a Bozeman-based nonprofit founded in 2001 with a mission to protect 3.2 million acres of central Montana prairie, announced the acquisition of the Anchor Ranch and 2 other Blaine County properties. The Anchor Ranch covers 67,960 acres in total, of which 22,837 are deeded and 45,123 are leased from public land agencies, a distinction that matters more than it might appear. American Prairie's total managed acreage reached approximately 600,000 acres following the announcement. But of that figure, 167,070 acres are owned outright as deeded land. The remaining 436,587 acres represent leased public land, where the organization holds grazing and use rights rather than title under frameworks dating to the 1934 Taylor Grazing Act, the federal legislation that established the lease system for public range. Those are fundamentally different legal positions, and treating them as equivalent overstates the ownership picture by a wide margin. Who sold the Anchor Ranch to American Prairie? The Wilks brothers. Critics of American Prairie, among them the United Property Owners of Montana and Governor Greg Gianforte, argue that conservation acquisitions pull productive agricultural land out of local economies, push prices beyond what working ranchers can afford, and complicate access to land that local communities have historically used. Chuck Deneau of United Property Owners of Montana told Fox News Digital in 2022 that the donors funding these acquisitions don't have to live with the consequences of what they're doing to these communities. American Prairie's position, per CEO Allison Fox's September 2025 statement, is that its acquisitions restore public access to land that was previously closed under private ownership, support wildlife habitat, and allow existing ranching lessees to remain in place. Whether that case is convincing depends considerably on who you ask and where they live and what they use the land for. Both of those debates are real and genuinely contested. The ownership data underneath them is not. It sits in the deed records, in the assessor parcels, in the tax mailing addresses, in the Montana cadastral database, available to anyone willing to pull the full picture together rather than reading it one parcel at a time. Metcalfe's study found that roughly 4,000 landowners control 2/3 of Montana's private land, and 13 of them hold 15% of that total. What that means for the rancher trying to expand a family operation, for the outfitter whose traditional access route now runs through a shell company's parcel, for the county trying to understand who actually holds its land base, remains an open question that assessor databases and LLC registries alone can't answer. They show you the structure. Working out what that structure does to a community is a different kind of work entirely, and it tends to happen slowly, well after the transactions have already closed. The pattern running through this story, large-scale acquisition conducted through fragmented corporate entities across multiple counties over multiple years, doesn't belong only to Montana. It repeats across the American West, through farmland states, and inside residential markets. Anywhere the gap between what the public record shows and what any individual buyer actually controls is wide enough to matter. That gap is the territory this channel covers, and the next one is already in research.